It's a safe bet that a fair few of you are fans of Plo Koon. Embodying the values of the Jedi Guardians, he was fiercely committed to justice and the fight against the dark side. Plo Koon has a reputation as a paragon of virtue, an example of everything the Jedi should be. By and large, his reputation checked out. But what tactics did he employ? As we've seen in this series many times already, many virtuous Jedi became much colder when on the battlefield, becoming all too comfortable with sacrificing lives. Was the same true for Plo Koon? For once, the answer is no. General Plo truly cared about his bros, and his tactics were a lot more conscientious than those of his contemporaries. Plo Koon was a Keldor and a pretty typical member of the species. He saw the universe in black and white, and he had a strong commitment to justice, which he preferred to be harsh and swift. Like many Jedi, he fought in the Clone Wars not out of simple obligation, but out of a genuine belief in the righteousness of the Loyalist cause. This is a bit of a shame, as the Loyalist cause wasn't really that righteous, but that's beside the point. During the Clone Wars, Plo Koon famously worked with Clone Commander Wolffe, the commander of the 104th Battalion, and he often fought alongside an elite squad called the Wolfpack. Their mission profiles were all over the place, quite frankly, though they did seem to have been saddled with rescue missions more than any other unit. Despite this, Plo and his troopers were competent and adaptable warriors, able to give the Separatists a thrashing anywhere and at any time. As a general, Plo Koon excelled not only in ground battles, but also in naval combat. He frequently commanded his troops not from the ground or the bridge of a Star Destroyer, but from the cockpit of his prized starfighter, the Blade of Dorin. If we had to pick, we'd say starfighter combat was his element, but he was a good commander in any medium, leading his forces to victory in battle after battle. From Geonosis at the start of the war to Cato Nemoidia at the end, Plo Koon had a pretty successful record as far as Jedi generals went. Unlike many, Jedi Plo Koon didn't shy away from combat. As a Jedi Guardian, he was much more eager to fight, and this reflected in his tactics. He preferred to strike fast and strike hard, obliterating Separatist targets before they even warmed up their guns. Plo Koon was one of the few Jedi with experience acting as a Jedi General at the outset of the Clone Wars, as he'd led Republic forces during the brief Stark Hyperspace War in 44 BBY. Koon brought a swift and decisive end to that war, rallying the outnumbered Republic Judicial Forces soldiers for a charge that, against all odds, succeeded. Plo Koon broke the back of the Stark commercial combine, and his successes heavily influenced his approach to the Clone Wars. Plo Koon was the kind of strategist who preferred to rush all of his objectives and get the battle over and done with, somewhat like Mace Windu. Like with Windu, his strategies probably wouldn't have worked for anyone beside a Jedi Master. But fortunately for the 104th Battalion, the force was with General Plo, and he knew it. He led his troops from the front whenever he could, just as he did during the Stark Hyperspace War, ordering them into tight formations so he could use his lightsaber to shield a whole squad from incoming fire. Generally speaking, Plo Koon determined his role in a battle first and then built his plans around it. This might seem like a small thing, but it really shows in some of his tactics. Unlike conventional commanders, his focus was on what he could do to help, with the role of everyone under his command being to support or reinforce him. He always saved the toughest jobs for himself. As a result, his tactics always bore the telltale marks of a typical Jedi battle strategy, built around charges that could quickly bring him into weapons range, employing overwhelming force and restraint in equal measure. This was evident in both the first and second battles of Felucia. In the first battle, Plo Koon personally commanded the Republic starfighter squadrons. He put in the majority of the work in the aerial stage of the battle, clearing out the worst of the Vulture droid swarm and then going to rescue his wingmen when the stragglers gave them trouble. During the second battle, in which the Republic initially held the advantage, he and General Skywalker planned an offensive against a major Separatist fortress. Their plan was essentially to attack it from all sides at once, with the Jedi leading the way on each front. The army itself served in a support role that battle, luring the Separatist defenders out of their base and mopping up whatever the generals failed to destroy. Clearly, delegating work wasn't Plo's thing. This leads into the defining feature of Plo Koon's battle strategies, his hesitancy to risk his subordinates' lives. While Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker tended to charge in guns blazing without much concern for the troopers behind them, Plo's tactics were always crafted with concern for his men. This frequently manifested in Plo coming up with crazy solo missions, or missions with one or two other Jedi, while the army dealt with some easier objective. Unlike most commanders, when Plo saw an obstacle that could incur high troop casualties, his solution was always to deal with it himself. Take the Battle of Giorgi, for example. It was an assault on one of the Separatists' most important shipyards, a stronghold world where Republic operatives were pinned down after a failed mission to destroy the base. An outright bloody assault on Giorgi would have been extremely bloody, so Plo Koon and Saesee Tiin instead executed a two-man attack run. In typical Jedi fashion, they performed a hyperspace jump down into Giorgi's atmosphere and carried out a string of attacks at close range, obliterating the shipyards and rescuing the Republic operatives. Plo Koon and Kit Fisto executed a similar strategy in the Battle of Korm. On Korm, Republic forces discovered that the local Separatist garrison was using a weather control station to make conditions as hostile as possible for the invaders. While Major Ozzel wanted to charge the Separatist primary fortress anyway, Plo deemed that the casualties of such a strategy would be unacceptable, so he set out with a small team to destroy the weather station instead. This is something most real-world tacticians only wish they could do. When Plo didn't like the starting conditions of a battle, he went and changed them. Returning to the first Battle of Felucia, Plo also used this approach to combat there. During the aerial battle near the end of the first Felucia campaign, Plo led a charge against the remnants of the Separatist starfighter forces with the objective of escorting evac gunships to the surface. But a vulture droid on his tail, Plo immediately broke off to help him out before returning to the main objective. Unlike most commanders, he prioritized the lives of his men over the success of his mission. Now, it should be said that these sorts of tactics were hit and miss in the Clone Wars. A lot of clones hated the whole charge in and let the Jedi do all the work routine because it was also employed by incompetent Jedi generals who often got their men killed in the process. A lot of the time, all these really did was make things easier for the Jedi. But Plo Koon had a knack for actually making them work, so he gets our respect for that. Clone Commander Wolffe is a favorite among fans of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. He's essentially the show's Boba Fett. In all but 3 episodes, he hardly shows his face, and even in those 3 episodes, he doesn't really do anything, but fans still love him, mostly because his armor is cool. Search your feelings, you know it to be true. Despite Wolffe's relatively minor involvement in the battles in which we've seen him fight, we're going to take a look at his tactics and command sensibilities. You might be surprised by our conclusions, namely that Wolffe didn't care about his fellow clones, or anyone for that matter, at least not as much as you might think. CC3636, commonly known as Wolffe, was Dave Filoni's obligatory Wolffe insert character, of which he must have at least one in every Star Wars project he works on. We're not saying Filoni is a furry, but anyway, now that we've gotten that off our chest, Wolffe was the commander of the 104th Battalion, a unit famed for the Wolffe Pack, a constituent squad of elite clones that usually worked alongside Wolffe and shared his aesthetic sensibilities. Wolffe and his pack usually fought under Jedi General Plo Koon, participating in some of the Clone Wars' toughest battles. It's said that the Wolffe Pack was one of the most regularly deployed units in the entire Grand Army of the Republic, but its limited number of appearances means we can't confirm this for sure. Wolffe and his boys were capable of carrying out a dizzying variety of mission types. Like most clones, they specialized in ground warfare, but they were also known to participate in aerial assaults, rescue missions, and even naval combat. Wolffe was one of the few clone commanders to serve in a naval command role, donning a naval officer's uniform for the Battle of Abrogado and the First Battle of Felucia. He apparently did these so-called out-of-armor tours on a regular basis, and he seems to have been a pretty capable naval commander. In fact, based on what we see in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, we'd actually argue that Wolffe was in his element in space. Even if he got cheated out of an actual fight at Abrogado, he did pretty well at Felucia, despite the fact that the Republic forces were comprehensively outmatched in that battle. As a matter of fact, that battle at Felucia was one of only 2 known battles in which Wolffe took command in his own right. On the ground, he almost always served as a liaison and occasional strategic consultant, never having much of a say in command decisions. This doesn't necessarily mean he was bad at ground command. After all, he was serving under Plo Koon, one of the Jedi Order's finest. All the same though, it's important to note Wolffe's lack of authority in most of the battles he fought in, as it differs from the likes of Captain Rex and Commander Cody. Commander Wolffe usually served alongside higher ranking officers, often General Plo, but unlike most clone liaisons, he seems to have been more of a sidekick than an active participant. This is readily apparent in the Battle of Abrogado, though that's not a fair example since Wolffe was stuck in an escape pod the whole time and didn't really have any agency. It's noticeable in other battles too, however. In the second Battle of Felucia, for example, Wolffe made no apparent contributions to the battle plan, merely following the orders. In other battles, like the Battle of Korm and the Battle of Iceberg 3, Wolffe was a bit more talkative, lending his superiors advice from time to time and critiquing their battle plans. However, even in those battles, he was still more of a sidekick. He always left the final decisions to his superiors, even when they disagreed with him. This was especially evident in the Battle of Korm, in which Wolffe served under Major Kendall Ozzel, an intensely incompetent career officer who somehow made it to the rank of Admiral before Darth Vader struck his name from the Imperial census. On Korm, Ozzel made some incredibly dumb and, more importantly, callous decisions that endangered the lives of Wolffe and his clone brethren. Ozzel ordered suicidal charges and then surrendered whenever his plans went sideways, despite knowing that Separatist droids often killed clones who surrendered to him. Ozzel's incompetence put him almost up there with Pong Krell's in terms of getting his own men killed, but Wolffe went along with it. Unlike Captain Rex and the 501st, Wolffe tolerated his incompetent superior officer even when it got his men killed. Wolffe never disobeyed Ozzel even when he openly disagreed with Ozzel's plans, and the 104th paid dearly for it. Wolffe even protected Ozzel when he panicked and more or less gave up, defending the Major from battle droids while Ozzel's dumb decisions got Wolffe's men killed all around him. That seems a bit odd, but there's more to learn about Commander Wolffe from the Battle of Korm. Later in the battle, Ozzel was knocked unconscious, and in his place, Wolffe took command of Republic ground forces for the final assault on the fortress of Kormai warlord Unger Gaut. Before breaking off from the main force and losing an eye to Asajj Ventress, Wolffe led his men in an interesting tactical maneuver. A full frontal assault on the Kormai citadel, right toward the enemy artillery. What's interesting about this is that it was practically the same maneuver Ozzel had attempted earlier in the battle. Wolffe's charge was just better timed, providing an opening for Plo Koon and Kit Fisto to destroy the artillery emplacements. Wolffe's role in the Battle of Korm is a bit of a head-scratcher. Despite his criticisms of Major Ozzel, Wolffe wasn't any more sophisticated in his tactics, though he had more guts. He charged an artillery line straight on. Surely he knew such a maneuver could get his men killed. To come to a conclusion about Korm, we need to first look at a type of operation that Wolffe regularly participated in: mercy missions. In the Clone Wars, we see Wolffe participate in as many mercy missions as he does actual battles. He and his men rescued Anakin Skywalker and Mace Windu from Vancor, saved a bunch of Togruta slaves from a Zygerian fortress on Kadavo, and most importantly, participated in a mercy mission to Alina. Alina was actually the only time we got to see Wolffe in sole command of an operation, and his approach to the mission was interesting. Wolffe could not have cared less about the people of Alina. They could have been devoured one by a monster, and he not only would have done nothing unless expressly ordered to, but it's also likely he would have celebrated being able to leave Alina early. His distaste for the mission manifested as a sort of dislike and general apathy for the people he was supposed to be helping. In fairness, this was an attitude shared by many of Wolffe's men, but it says something about the commander himself, especially since he was much more of a jerk to the people of Alina than any of the others. Wolffe wasn't a righteous, caring sort of clone like Captain Rex. He just wanted to do his job, and he preferred the path of least resistance. In context with Wolffe's behavior on Korm, we can only conclude that Dave Filoni's persona just didn't care that much about lives in general. Sure, he changed the color of the unit's armor paint to mourn the losses the Wolfpack suffered on Abrogado, but he was still willing to let Ozzel deploy his men in suicidal charges. He still ordered them to brave artillery fire on Qom, and he never expressed any genuine care for the lives he was supposed to be saving during his various mercy missions. Now, you could argue that Wolffe was just a stoic, and perhaps he was, but tactically speaking, Wolffe was just cold. He wanted to complete his missions and preferred things as simple as possible, even if that meant following the orders of an incompetent superior as they threw lives away, or abandoning the people of Alina to their problems. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi, a phenomenal pilot who doesn't like to fly, a devastating warrior who'd rather not fight, a negotiator without peer who frankly prefers to sit alone in a quiet cave and meditate. Jedi Master, General in the Grand Army of the Republic, member of the Jedi Council, and yet, inside, he feels like he's none of those things. This passage from the Revenge of the Sith novelization perfectly outlines the character of everyone's favorite Jedi Master. Our beloved Space Jesus was a man of many talents, but he was usually rather loath to exercise them, preferring to settle matters as simply as possible. This earned him a reputation for being a bit of a softie, especially on the battlefield. This couldn't have been further from the truth, however. As stated in the aforementioned passage, Kenobi was a devastating warrior and a cunning tactician, and on the battlefield, he was a lot colder than you might expect. During the Clone Wars, loyalist civilians all over the galaxy were treated to regular doses of propaganda via the Republic-controlled HoloNet News, which regularly embellished stories of valiant clone troopers or recruited officers to give the people hope. The exploits of the Jedi were usually minimized or ignored, with two exceptions. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, in contrast to most Jedi, were given wall-to-wall coverage, with newscasters breathlessly reporting every little thing they got up to. Over the course of the war, they became celebrities with exaggerated personas, propaganda tools so effective that, to quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization again, younglings followed as if they were sports heroes instead of warriors. The two Jedi were usually referred to as a single unit, so much so that the phrase Kenobi and Skywalker practically became a single word in common parlance. But the HoloNet also constructed legends for each of them, often emphasizing how different they were from each other. The HoloNet often referred to Obi-Wan Kenobi as the negotiator, a nom de guerre that emphasized Kenobi's legendary diplomatic capabilities. He was depicted as cool and composed, a remarkably balanced man who, while capable in combat, was capable of ending battles without firing a single shot. Of course, this was just how Republic propaganda described Kenobi. There was a fair bit of truth to it, but as you might expect, it was oversimplified and exaggerated. General Kenobi did prefer negotiation to fighting, and he was indeed an incredibly skilled diplomat. He was also famous for giving his enemies an opportunity to surrender even in the middle of a fight. Anyone who's watched Star Wars: The Clone Wars or even just Revenge of the Sith knows this well, as Kenobi offered even the likes of General Grievous a chance to surrender. But Kenobi wasn't naive, and while he was merciful, this didn't come at the cost of tactical aptitude. Kenobi didn't prefer negotiations because he was soft or a pacifist or anything like that. He was a diplomat first and a warrior second because that was the Jedi way. Obi-Wan was a devoted follower of the Jedi Code, which meant he always tried to pursue the course of action that would lead to the least suffering, even if there were quicker, easier options available. Often, these values led Kenobi to pursue negotiation even when it seemed impractical, but at the same time, these values also made him a remarkably cold general. Above all, Obi-Wan Kenobi was rational, sometimes ruthlessly so. After exhausting diplomatic alternatives, he was more than willing to go on the attack, and when he did, he didn't pull any punches. If Obi-Wan Kenobi resolved to fight, he wouldn't stop until victory was his, unless victory required an unnecessary amount of deaths. Additionally, Kenobi didn't hesitate to make sacrifices on the battlefield, even though he usually tried to keep as many of his clones alive as possible. He was no stranger to hard calls, and he always made them with the decisive calm of a true Jedi Master. As an example of this, let's look at a somewhat obscure but fairly important Clone Wars battle, the Battle of Zadja. On Zadja, a frigid ice planet in the Siskiyne Theater, General Kenobi and Commander Skywalker led the Third System's army in a massive ground assault against a remote Geonosian colony, which housed a crucial droid factory. In reality, this assault was a ruse. While Kenobi kept the droid army occupied on the surface, he sent Jedi Padawan Tono into the factory to destroy it from the inside. Both Tono and Kenobi knew in advance that this was likely a suicide mission, and indeed, Tono perished during the battle. But her sacrifice helped destroy the factory, dealing a serious blow to the Separatist war effort and winning the battle. While soon-to-be Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker was uncomfortable about how Tono had thrown away her life, Kenobi had no compunctions about it. Tono had played her part willingly, and Kenobi accepted that she had done what was necessary to win the battle with minimal casualties. This might seem uncharacteristic for Kenobi, though it's anything but. He sacrificed Tono for the same reason he always pursued negotiation. It was a bid to save as many lives as possible. It was an extremely pragmatic perspective, one that anyone who isn't a Jedi might have trouble wrapping their heads around. Obi-Wan Kenobi served the greater good, and he was determined to never let his personal feelings get in the way of carrying out the will of the Force. Now, this didn't mean that Kenobi was unnecessarily callous. He was only willing to sacrifice others for the greater good to an extent. In the Battle of Jabim, for example, he outright rejected the suggestion of assassinating the planet's political leaders to destabilize the Jabimi nationalists, deeming it a bridge too far. Kenobi hated taking lives, even the lives of his enemies. Still, whenever he believed he had no choice, he did what needed to be done. Sometimes, what needed to be done included small-scale war crimes. As I'm sure many of you remember, he surrendered to General Warm Loathsome under false pretenses, using surrender talks to stall for a time and taking Loathsome prisoner once General Skywalker turned the tide of the battle. This rather unsavory act won the battle for the Republic, however, and it probably saved lives, so from Kenobi's perspective, it was probably worth it. Even when it came to more run-of-the-mill scenarios, Kenobi wasn't afraid of being aggressive on the battlefield. During the Battle of Munilinst, Kenobi deployed lines of SPHAT artillery to shell the Mun capital of Harnaden, obliterating a swath of the city and destroying much of the droid army in the process. Now, as far as we can determine, there were no civilians present in the city at the time, so this was a legitimate course of action, but it was still a use of overwhelming force you might expect from General Grievous, not General Kenobi. On Munilinst, Kenobi's aggressive tactics paid off, helping him quickly capture a crucial Separatist stronghold. General Kenobi's aggressive tactics were also a major contributor to the Republic's victory in the Battle of Umbara. General Kenobi was also known for his cunning. Deception usually wasn't the Jedi way, but in war, such tactics can save lives. Kenobi often employed feints and diversions, such as when he offered himself up to General Grievous as bait during a battle above Seleucami, distracting Grievous while Anakin Skywalker and Adi Gallia boarded his flagship. Those sorts of strategies were a speciality of Kenobi's. Sneaky tactics hardly count as fair play, but then again, Kenobi was never trying to be fair. He was trying to save lives and was perfectly willing to sacrifice convention to do so. Even with all that in mind, however, Obi-Wan Kenobi wasn't nearly as cold as his enemies. As we've said many times, he valued sentient life above all else, and he was willing to inconvenience himself and his men to win a battle in a way that avoided civilian casualties. There's no better example of this than the Battle of Ryloth, in which Kenobi and Ghost Company infiltrated the Separatist-held village of Nabat to destroy artillery the Confederacy had installed in the village center. The tactical droid in command of the Separatist garrison, TX-20, had rounded up the population of the village and deployed them as meat shields to protect the cannons. A more callous man than Kenobi might have bombed the city center anyway, killing the hostages to destroy the cannons. Instead, Kenobi risked his life on an infiltration mission, forbidding his troops from killing civilians or even damaging their homes if it could be avoided. These sorts of roundabout tactics were what recruited officers like Will of Tarkin hated the Jedi for, but they paid off. In Nabat, Kenobi managed to save the civilian population and destroy the cannons. In war, it can be tempting for commanders to make moral shortcuts in the pursuit of easy victories, but Obi-Wan Kenobi overcame such temptations. Even though he was a colder tactician than many of us realize, he was still a Jedi and he never compromised his Jedi ideals. Though he's often overshadowed by his pal Captain Rex, Clone Commander Cody was one of the most effective clone officers in the Grand Army of the Republic. He might not have been the flashiest clone or the one with the most distinct personality, but he always got the job done. He was effective enough as a tactician that his superior officer, General Kenobi, often trusted him with the particulars of strategy, giving Cody a greater degree of strategic control than most other Jedi did with their clone liaisons. In this video, we're going to be explaining why, as we dive into the unique tactical approach of Commander Cody. Cody, originally known as CC-2224, was one of only a few clones that was given the rank of Marshal Commander, the highest rank a clone could achieve in the Grand Army of the Republic. In his role as Marshal Commander, Cody commanded the 7th Sky Corps, a large clone unit that specialized in aerial combat and rapid assault. In particular, Cody often worked with the 212th Attack Battalion, a unit within the 7th Sky Corps which fought on the front lines of some of the war's fiercest battles. The 7th Sky Corps was part of the 3rd Systems Army, commanded by one General Kenobi, and due to his role as a clone liaison, Cody was de facto the 2nd in command of the whole 3rd Army as well. This was a lot more authority than most clones were given, and Cody made the most of it. Though he wasn't nearly as independent as the likes of Captain Rex, Cody frequently took the initiative in battle, especially in situations when General Kenobi was unavailable or incapacitated. Two notable examples of this were the Second Battle of Geonosis and the Battle of Surish. On Surish, Cody took command of a scattered Republic force after a botched landing attempt, leading them in destroying a Separatist anti-air gun and allowing Kenobi to land with the rest of the 7th Sky Corps. On Geonosis, meanwhile, Cody had to salvage virtually the entire Republic invasion effort after all his superiors were shot down. Despite significant setbacks, Cody managed to hold Republic forces at Point Rain together until the other generals and their men arrived at the rendezvous point. While Surish eventually ended poorly for the Republic, Cody's actions on Geonosis single-handedly saved the day for the Republic. Clearly, Cody was a competent tactician, but despite his outstanding record, his tactics weren't all that unusual. In many ways, Cody was like General Kenobi. He was by the book for the most part and didn't really go in for elaborate, flashy strategies. But the simplicity of Cody's tactics was a large part of why he was so effective. He struck a balance between being a careful planner and a flexible commander, pursuing deliberate, conservative strategies without making them too rigid or incapable of adapting to changing battlefield conditions. Like any good commander, Cody preferred to play to his men's strengths. The men of the 7th Sky Corps were trained for rapid assaults, so those featured heavily in Cody's tactics. He always preferred to strike quickly and decisively at the outset of a battle, gaining as much ground as possible before the enemy recovered from the shock of the initial assault. In many battles, especially later in the war, Cody made extensive use of jetpack tactics in these initial strikes, having units like the 2nd Airborne Company drop onto enemy positions from high altitudes to take the Separatists by surprise. These initial assaults were often highly effective. In the opening stages of the Battle of Utapau, Cody successfully captured the Confederacy's command center in a matter of minutes with this strategy, giving the 212th Attack Battalion a strong foothold early in the battle. Cody led his men in another lightning strike on the village of Nabat during the Battle of Ryloth, taking the Separatist perimeter troops by surprise and quickly neutralizing them before they could call for backup. Cody also made use of this tactic during the Battle of Surish, in which he used it to neutralize Separatist artillery, as well as in the Battle of Teth, in which he and his men wiped out a Separatist army completely in one rapid assault. Of course, these sorts of lightning strikes could only get Cody so far, and after the initial assault, his tactics often shifted. Once he'd made some gains and established a foothold on the battlefield, Cody switched to more careful and conservative tactics. His approach became much slower, more precise, and more deliberate. In the assaults on Nabat during the Battle of Ryloth, for example, Cody and his men laid low after getting inside the village, carefully scouting out the place before making any attempt at attacking the Separatist command center. Cody made good use of his scouts, especially Waxer and Boyle, always making sure that he had as much information as possible before moving forward with his plans. Cody didn't like wasting lives or resources, which was probably why he didn't care for overly elaborate tactics. He made the most of every soldier and war machine under his command, something that made him very effective at coordinating defenses. He showed this clearly during the Second Battle of Geonosis, when he was forced to defend the Republic landing zone at Point Rain with far less manpower than he had been counting on. Even as the Geonosians attacked Point Rain from all sides, Cody had his ATTEs surround the landing zone to soak up enemy fire, and then had his gunships fill in the gaps in the ring, turning aircraft that had already served their purpose into makeshift fortifications. At Point Rain, Cody and his men fought conservatively and ferociously, constantly firing at their attackers but refraining from wasting their strength in attempted countercharges. Point Rain was effectively under siege from Geonosian forces, but while more hot-headed commanders might have tried to break that siege, Cody fought conservatively, allowing himself to be encircled to minimize casualties. This allowed Republic forces to hold out until reinforcements arrived. Cody often chose the path of least resistance in battle, going with whatever approach seemed the surest to succeed and would incur minimal casualties. During sieges of well-defended separatist worlds, this meant that Cody often chose to sit back and shell the enemy into oblivion instead of trying to end the battle more quickly. In one siege late in the Clone Wars, Cody was perfectly happy to sit back and shell a shielded separatist citadel for nearly 2 months on end, much to the frustration of Generals Kenobi and Skywalker. While the Jedi generals wanted to end the battle faster, Cody was fine with waiting if it meant that he wouldn't have to waste lives attempting to storm the fortress prematurely. This might seem lazy or uncreative, but it probably kept casualties low. Of course, Cody was also willing to try out more unorthodox strategies if they would end battles more quickly. In the Battle of Cato Nemoidia, Cody helped plan and command a mission to infiltrate Newt Gunray's personal fortress, which was a faster and more efficient way to win the battle than a direct assault. On Ryloth too, he leaned into the unorthodox, leading his men in a risky diversion attempt during the assault on TX-20's command center in Nabat to buy Kenobi time to fulfill the Republic's main objectives. All told, Cody was pretty good at a whole slew of diverse tactical approaches, and that may have been his greatest strength. It's said that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. Rigid strategies rarely work out well, both in real life and in the Star Wars universe. Good tactics require flexibility, and Commander Cody was quite good at changing his plans on the fly and adapting his strategies to changing battlefield circumstances. The aforementioned example of the Second Battle of Geonosis demonstrates this quite well. As we've discussed, the initial landing at Point Rain didn't go according to plan, and Cody had to alter the Republic's battle strategy on the fly when it became apparent that he was the highest ranking officer at the landing site. In a matter of minutes, as Geonosians swarmed around Point Rain, Cody drastically altered the plan, abandoning the planned lightning strike on the Geonosians' forward shield generator in favor of setting up a defense of the landing zone. That took quick thinking and a fair bit of creativity on his part, and it exemplifies why he was one of the highest ranked commanders in the GAR. Mace Windu was one of the Star Wars universe's all-time greatest badasses. He was also one of its foremost military commanders, an accomplished strategist who led the Grand Army of the Republic to victory on many occasions. While some Jedi fought in the Clone Wars with reluctance, Windu didn't hesitate to get involved from the get-go, and his faith in the Republic didn't waver until the very end. As far as tactics go, Windu's approach to battle was reckless to say the least, perhaps even more so than Anakin Skywalker's. It was undeniably effective, however, and in this video, we'll be explaining why. There wasn't a Jedi in the Order more dedicated to the prosecution of the Clone Wars than Mace Windu. At the start of the war, he actually gave up his title as the head of the Jedi Council so that he could devote more time to command. Those of you who've read the Revenge of the Sith novelization should know why he was so passionate. He valued the Republic more than anything else, seeing it as the embodiment of everything the Jedi fought for, and he was willing to do anything to protect it. As a member of the Jedi High Council, Windu was given the rank of High General. He commanded Systems Army Alpha, which included many of the most elite units in the Grand Army of the Republic, including the 91st Reconnaissance Corps, the 327th Star Corps, and Windu's own personal unit, the 187th Legion. He worked with a number of clone commanders, most notably Commander Pons and Commander Neo of the 91st, but he didn't get as close with them as some other Jedi did with their commanders. Windu was flexible in this regard, working with whoever and whatever was convenient. Due to the broad scope of his role, Windu spent most of the war on Coruscant, coordinating the units under his command as they put down separatist incursions all over the Republic. Windu was a very different general in a war room than one on the battlefield. When he was on Coruscant, overseeing troop movements and grand strategy, he was much more cautious and by the book, carefully weighing crucial decisions and debating courses of action with Yoda and Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. When he was personally involved in a battle though, things were different. Windu's approach to battlefield tactics was largely a reflection of his personal combat philosophy, Vapad. Now, you may have heard of Vapad, but bear with us here, because it's poorly understood in the fanbase. It's a common misconception that Mace Windu leaned toward the dark side a tad, or that he drew on both the dark side and light side in combat. This wasn't true. Mace Windu was a light sider through and through. Vapad, however, brought the user through the penumbra of the dark side, making use of the dangerous emotions that Jedi usually tried to avoid. But Vapad wasn't the use of the dark side, not on its own, nor in a smaller dose. To quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, it worked as follows. Vapad is a channel for darkness, and that darkness flowed both ways. He accepted the furious speed of the Sith Lord, drew the Shadow's rage and power into his innermost center, and let it fountain out again. He reflected the fury upon its source as a lightsaber redirects a blaster bolt. He was not afraid. The darkness had no power over him, but neither did he have power over it. Vapad made him an open channel, half of a superconducting loop completed by the Shadow. Also highly relevant to Windu's battlefield tactics was Shatterpoint, a rare force ability with which Windu was gifted. He could essentially see how certain things affected each other, foresee patterns of cause and effect. His greatest strength was in feeling for Shatterpoints, individuals or things that had the potential to change the future in dramatic ways. To Windu, the world was like a great pane of glass with countless fractures running through it, connecting beings to each other. Some beings lay at the juncture of several major fractures, and if struck, they could shatter the whole pane. Vapad and Shatterpoint were the foundation of Windu's unorthodox approach to battlefield command. Shatterpoint's utility on the battlefield is kind of obvious. It helped Windu see the flaws in the plans of his enemies and which points to strike to make them break. Vapad also heavily influenced Windu's approach. The technique itself wasn't suitable for use against multiple combatants, but the general principle of Vapad was. Much as he could turn Palpatine's anger and hate back toward him, he could completely reverse the momentum of battle, meeting separatist offensives with devastating countercharges. A good example of Windu using both techniques in a tactical setting was the attack on Lesu during the Battle of Ryloth. When trying to take the heavily defended city of Lesu, Windu first determined the shatter point of the separatist occupation force, Wat Tambor. He then based his plans around breaking through separatist lines and quickly capturing Tambor, making everything else a secondary objective. Since Lesu could only be accessed through a single energy bridge controlled from inside the city, some degree of subterfuge was required at the outset of the battle. Ultimately, Windu elected to sneak inside the city with a pair of ARF troopers. Once inside, however, Mace Windu let loose. He sent the clones to take the bridge control room and keep the bridge open so that the bulk of the Joint Republic Twi'lek army could move in. Once they were on their way, Windu made a beeline for the main objective, not waiting for backup and forgetting what his men were doing. He charged toward the Separatist Shatterpoint and struck it, capturing Tambor. Once Tambor was apprehended, the defense of Lesu crumbled and the battle was won. Ryloth was a pretty typical example of Windu's approach to command. His tactics were usually based around head-on charges, which he always led from the front, mowing down anything within reach of his lightsaber. In every major battle he commanded, the pattern was the same. He found the weak point in the Separatist lines, he led his men in a charge against it, he broke off to complete the objective, and then the clones trailed after him, mopping up whatever was left in his wake. On the surface, this was insanely reckless, and for anyone who wasn't Mace Windu, it would have been a terrible approach. However, it worked for Windu because everything's easy when you're a one-man army. Windu made use of these tactics as early as the first Battle of Geonosis, in which he charged the Separatist grounded troop transports head-on. But perhaps the most dramatic example of Windu's tactics was the Battle of Dantooine. On Dantooine, the course of a field battle was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a Separatist seismic tank, which used a colossal piston to pulverize the battlefield and everything on it. The tank's arrival threw everything into disarray, scattering clone troopers and battle droids alike. Windu lost his lightsaber and was completely cut off from his troops, finding himself alone and unarmed in the middle of a huge droid army. But Mace Windu wasn't one to quit, and he ended up tearing a huge swathe through the droids with nothing but the Force and his bare hands. After recovering his lightsaber, Windu led a one-man assault on the seismic tank, bringing the behemoth down and allowing what remained of his unit to win the battle. Yet again, Windu essentially abandoned his men to take out the main objective, and yet again, it worked. One last example of Windu using this approach was during the early stages of the Battle of Coruscant. On Coruscant, the shadow point of the Separatist invasion force was initially unclear, so Windu ended up bouncing between the theaters until he found it. When the battle began, he took to the skies to join the fight in orbit, where the battle was fiercest. But after his fighter was destroyed in the upper atmosphere, he decided to instead commandeer a vulture droid and participate in the sky battle. Once Separatist troops landed in Galactic City, Windu returned to the ground in dramatic fashion, deliberately crushing his stolen craft into the advancing battle droids, leading an army of clones in a counter-offensive against the Separatists. Then, when it finally became apparent that the Separatists' main objective was to kidnap Palpatine, Windu abandoned the ground battle too, leaving it to Yoda. He then made a beeline for the last known position of General Grievous, hoping to take him out and end the battle, though Windu ultimately showed up too late. All told, his performance on Coruscant was a dizzying display of how haphazard his tactics could be, and how he could develop tunnel vision in the heat of battle. Again though, it did work most of the time, so credit where credit's due. In a surprising turn of events, it turns out that Windu was even more chaotic on the battlefield than Anakin Skywalker. Who would have guessed? Fans of Star Wars: The Clone Wars often argue about which clone character was the best. Many think it's Captain Rex, the show's poster boy. Others would argue that it's Wolffe, Fives, or perhaps a more unconventional choice. However, as the legends and joyers in the audience know, the best clone character is actually Alpha 17. Alpha was one of the first ARC troopers trained by Jango Fett himself. He served as a commander alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker early in the war, distinguishing himself in command roles in several battles. He was one of the most competent clones in the entire Grand Army, and one of the coldest too. In this video, we're taking a look at Alpha and his rather callous tactics. Alpha 17 was part of the Alpha class ARC troopers, a lineage that also included Alpha 77, better known as Captain Fordo. The Alpha class only contained 100 clones, and they were bred to be the greatest soldiers in the galaxy. Unlike most clones, they were almost exact copies of Jango Fett, but with slightly enhanced physical attributes. This meant the Alpha class ARCs were a lot darker and more solitary than their normie brethren. In fact, we reckon some of them would give Crosshair a run for his money in this regard. But they were indisputably effective. Alpha 17 was even more intense than some of his brothers. The man held nothing back, always willing to tell everyone from civilian politicians to his superior officers exactly what he thought about them. He was also quite open about his complete lack of regard for innocent lives. In his view, there was no such thing. He was even willing to murder young clones if he felt the mission demanded it. Like many other clones, he had a laser focus on completing his missions, but not necessarily out of any sense of loyalty to the Republic. Like Crosshair, Alpha fought for the Republic because it was his job, and that was all he really needed. Like most of the other Alpha class arcs, Alpha preferred to work as a lone wolf but rarely got the opportunity to do so. Most of the time, he served as a commander, albeit in a less traditional capacity than most clone commanders. ARC troopers, in case you didn't know, weren't actually part of the GAR military hierarchy. They and the clone commandos had their own separate hierarchy under the banner of the Republic's Special Operations Brigade. Nonetheless, Alpha and many of his brothers were chosen to act as clone liaisons by Jedi generals, attaching themselves to GAR units in a command advisory role. This is important to know before considering Alpha's tactics for a few reasons. First, the scope of Alpha's command varied wildly. On some missions, he had little command authority beyond a small squad, while sometimes he acted in a leadership role for entire planetary invasion forces. Secondly, since Alpha wasn't attached to any given clone unit, he didn't bond with the men under his command, and as a result, he didn't care about them nearly as much as a clone like Rex would. On the battlefield, Alpha was capable of ruthlessness equal to some Separatist commanders. His logic was simple. Most of the time, he found the most efficient path to his objective, and he took it. Sometimes, this meant sacrifices or callous maneuvers, while at other times, it ended up saving lives. He usually stood his ground against moral objections to his plan, but he was willing to hear out objections and would acquiesce if a more efficient plan came to light. A good example of this would be Alpha's first mission, the First Battle of Kamino. This battle, which took place near the start of the war, saw Topoka City almost completely overrun, leading to the Kaminoans to dispatch the ARC troopers in a desperate effort to turn the tide. Upon being awakened from suspended animation, the troopers immediately set about doing what Jango Fett had ordered them to do in such a situation. In Alpha's case, this meant destroying all of the youngest generations of clones, those too young to be easily evacuated. Without the slightest bit of hesitancy, Alpha set out to blow his younger brothers to smithereens, responding to objections from the Jedi present with the chilling assertion, either they grow up loyal to the Republic, or they don't grow up at all. The Jedi, naturally, weren't willing to stand for this and insisted that Alpha first give them a chance to save the young clones. After consideration, Alpha agreed to do so. On the spot, he came up with a new plan. If the Jedi would cut the youngest clones off from the rest of the facility, he offered, he would abort the detonation sequence. The Jedi complied, and Alpha shut off the bombs before returning to the main fight. It's worth noting here that Alpha was technically the lowest ranking adult in the room that episode. Despite this, he not only saw fit to order his Jedi superiors around, but also got them to follow his plans. Clearly, Alpha didn't care all that much about clone lives, but his fellow clones weren't the only innocents he was willing to sacrifice either. During the Battle of Jabim, Alpha repeatedly asked General Kenobi for permission to hunt down and assassinate the remaining Jabimi political leaders, most of them civilians, believing that it would weaken the resolve of the enemy and hasten an end to the battle. Kenobi repeatedly struck the plan down, but Alpha was persistent, especially since he believed they would probably be killed before the battle's end anyway. Unlike on Kamino, Kenobi wasn't able to present a more efficient alternative to Alpha's morally dubious plan, so Alpha stood his ground. The only reason he didn't go over Kenobi's head and order the assassination mission anyway was that he respected Kenobi. Alpha was a cold mofo. He was willing to sacrifice anything to complete his objectives if he deemed it necessary. But it should be said, his tactics weren't completely heartless. He was willing to go out of the way to rescue hostages even if it complicated missions, and he never ordered his men to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. Most of the time, in fact, he led the charge into battle, putting his own life on the line before anyone else's. On Boz Pity, for example, Alpha was severely wounded in a battle with General Grievous, leaving him unable to stand and potentially paralyzed from the waist down. Despite this, as the medics hauled him away to a transport, he insisted on getting a blaster and returning to the fight, reasoning that his arms worked just fine. He wasn't willing to let the men under his command stand alone against Grievous, at least not until he was dead. If you asked, Alpha would have told you that this was because he preferred to do jobs himself so that they got done right. But that would be only partly true. He did care for the troops under his command and was willing to sacrifice himself to win a battle just as much as any of them were. As a general rule, Alpha's strategies were brutal and often callous, but they were also undeniably effective. He subjected his enemies to relentless pressure, going right for the throat whenever he could. With that said, Alpha wasn't overly aggressive. He always kept an eye on the flanks of his armies, careful they weren't becoming overextended. Notably, this happened in the Battle of Jabim. In the earlier stages of the battle, Republic forces on Jabim won engagement after engagement for 2 weeks on end, giving the Jedi generals leading the charge hope that Jabim would fall within short order. But while the Jedi were starting to become optimistic, Alpha kept a level head and realized that Republic forces were being strung out. On his initiative, the vanguard of the Republic army was recalled to defend the command center at Shelter Base just before it came under attack. Alpha's intuition saved many lives that day. Even though the casualties at Shelter Base were staggering, they would have been far worse without his observation. Unfortunately for the Republic, Alpha was one of the casualties at Shelter Base, having been badly wounded and then captured by the Separatists. Without him, Jabim rapidly turned into a bloodbath. Alpha was absolutely a cold commander, but not beyond reason, nor to the point of overt cruelty. He never allowed himself to get so caught up in offensives that he developed tunnel vision, unlike a number of less aggressive Jedi generals. For Darth Sidious, the Clone Wars were a single-player chess game. As the shadowy benefactor of the CIS on one side and the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic on the other, he manipulated events so that the war would play out as he saw fit. Usually, his approach was subtle, but now and then, he acted in more direct ways, taking inconveniences out of the picture entirely. One such intervention happened early in the Clone Wars when Sidious manipulated the outcome of the First Battle of Kamino to kill off a Separatist commander he saw as a threat. This Separatist, the Mon Calamari commander Merai, was such a brilliant strategist that Sidious feared he could end the war too quickly, and in this video, we'll be telling his story. In the decades before the Clone Wars, the water world Mon Calamari, known to its natives as Dak, was a bit of a contentious place. The planet was dominated by two sentient species, the Mon Calamari and the Quarren, and the two of them had a long rivalry stretching back to the day they encountered each other thousands of years ago. The Mon Calamari lived near the surface of the planet's oceans, gaining a reputation across the galaxy as master shipbuilders, while the Quarren lived in the depths, mining ore for the Mon Calamari's use. Exploited by their neighbors, whom they hated with a passion, the Quarren fought several wars against the Mon Calamari. By the time of the Clone Wars, the most recent was the Quarren War of 42 BBY. It was in that war that Merai proved himself to be both a valiant warrior and a tactical genius. On Dak, he was considered one of the best commanders of all time, and he was almost single-handedly responsible for ending the Quarren War in the Mon Calamari's favor. He was heralded as a war hero by the Mon Calamari, one of the most decorated officers of the Quarren War. 20 years later, Dak became embroiled in another conflict, the Separatist Crisis, which rapidly blossomed into the Clone Wars. Originally, the planet remained loyal to the Republic, but after the Quarren Senator Tikez jumped ship and joined the Confederacy, Dak was divided between loyalists and separatists. Most of the Mon Calamari remained loyal to the Republic, and they replaced Tikez with another Quarren, Tundra Dalmia, in a bid to get their neighbors on their side. But most of the Quarren sided with Tikez. They formed the Quarren Isolation League and the Free Dak Volunteer Engineering Corps, playing a vital role in the Clone Wars on the side of the CIS. As most of you probably know, Dak was the site of two conflicts between the Quarren and the Mon Calamari during the Clone Wars. In these battles, the two species split across galactic partisan lines, with the Quarren calling in droid troops from the CIS and the Mon Calamari requesting aid from the Republic. In both battles, the Mon Calamari, and by extension the Republic, emerged victorious. These victories were possible primarily because of the species lines the battles were fought along. In other words, because the Mon Calamari were Republic allies and the Mon Calamari were stronger militarily than the Quarren, the Republic won. But if Merai had lived to see either battle, things might have gone much differently. That's because, despite being Mon Calamari, Merai was a staunch separatist. Even as the Quarren he had bested 20 years ago entered talks with Count Dooku, Merai was in talks with Pascal Argente of the Corporate Alliance, who was looking to recruit him to lead an attack on Naboo. Merai agreed in the hope that his actions would inspire other Mon Calamari to side with the Separatists, bringing Dak into the Confederacy. He was revered enough that, had he lived a little longer, he could have led a much larger Mon Calamari Separatist faction, likely giving the CIS full control of one of the galaxy's greatest shipyards. This, combined with his tactical brilliance, made him a serious destabilizing force for Darth Sidious's plans. Pascal Argente, Mirai's benefactor, was also seen as a threat by Sidious, as he was ambitious and sought to usurp Count Dooku's place as leader of the Confederacy. At length, Sidious decided to deal with both threats in one fell swoop. Thus, Sidious engineered the first Battle of Kamino. He leaked top-secret intel about Tipoca City and its defenses to Argente, and he and Merai promptly launched an attack on the GAR's homeworld. Since Merai was from an ocean planet, Argente figured that he was an ideal choice to lead the assault on watery Kamino, even though their battle plan didn't call for aquatic combat. Instead, Merai planned to take the Republic forces by surprise, pin the defenders down into Tipoca City, and destroy the city's main reactor from above, crippling the Grand Army of the Republic. Merai led the offensive personally from the bridge of a Lucrehulk-class battleship, which was crewed by a team of Mon Calamari loyal to him alone. At first, the battle went well. Mirai's initial assault overwhelmed Kamino's Jedi defenders, and his droid armies made rapid progress into Tipoca City, gunning down the city's defenders left and right. But unbeknownst to Merai, the Republic had reinforcements waiting in the wings, as the Jedi Council had been tipped off about the attack before it began. The arrival of Republic naval reinforcements and the deployment of ARC troopers in the city began to turn the tide of the battle. Mirai's ground forces were repulsed by the efforts of the ARCs, and his ships were crippled by the Republic's reinforcement fleet. As his ship began to fall apart around him, Merai rushed to the hangar and hopped into his personal starfighter, the Shark, a unique amphibious craft capable of operation in space, atmosphere, and the deep sea. He escaped his crippled battleship, but he made no attempt to retreat. Instead, he headed straight for Tipoca City. Even as his plans started to go sideways, Commander Merai refused to accept defeat. He flew the Shark down into the sea beneath Tipoca City, planning to take out the city's main reactor personally, using the plans of the city Argente had given him. When Merai arrived at the spot where the reactor was meant to be, however, he found nothing. The plans Sidious had given Argente, which Argente had supplied to Merai, were forged. The whole battle was a trap, and Merai had walked right into it. He realized this, but by that point, it was too late. When the Shark surfaced, Merai was immediately swarmed by Jedi starfighters. His ground armies were retreating from Tipoca City, and his fleet was at a breaking point. Seeing no other option, Merai ordered his ships to retreat while he took out one last objective. He sped into orbit, evading the Jedi starfighters as he went, making for the hyperdrive rings they had arrived in. When he reached the hyperdrive rings, Merai triggered the Shark's self-destruct, killing himself and destroying the rings in the process. In doing so, he effectively covered his fleet's retreat, drawing the Jedi away and preventing them from pursuing. Merai died saving the lives of his remaining crew, but his sacrifice meant little in the grand scheme of things, especially next to the damage his death did to the Confederacy. With Merai gone, the threat of separatist Mon Calamari evaporated, and Sidious could rest assured that the Clone Wars would be long and drawn out. Sidious also succeeded in taking Pascal Argente down a peg, making him responsible for the disaster at Kamino and Mirai's death. All would proceed according to plan. Commander Merai was a tactical genius, a legend who could have changed the course of the Clone Wars. The strategic and political contributions he could have made to the Confederacy would have been invaluable. But Merai was tricked by the real power behind the Clone Wars, and because of that, he ended up as a mere footnote in the history books, made into just another dead separatist in Darth Sidious's proxy war. With him gone, the Mon Calamari consolidated under the Loyalist banner, and when the Clone Wars came to Dak, the Republic came out on top. So that was the tale of Commander Merai. the separatist Mon Calamari genius you've probably never heard of. Merai comes from the Star Wars Republic comics, which you should totally check out if you haven't already. The Confederacy of Independent Systems acquired the services of many accomplished tacticians during the Clone Wars, among them Admiral Trench, Commander Merai, and General Grievous. But Star Wars fans often forget one of the Separatists' greatest commanders, Riff Tamson, the vicious warlord who led Separatist forces in the Battle of Mon Cala. We don't know all that much about Tamson, as he and his people haven't appeared beyond that one Clone Wars arc, but we got a good look at his tactics in the Battle of Mon Cala. So in this video, we're going to give this genius his due.
Is somebody out there? Fishy, 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 come and eat me too. You can't get me, little fishy. Not in here. I'm safe behind my wall.
Riff Tamson was a Carcharodon, a member of a shark-like species from Carcharis in the Nilgard sector. His people were intensely violent, unlike real-world sharks, which are not nearly as aggressive as they're commonly believed to be. Carcharodons were amphibious and could breathe in the open atmosphere just fine, but they preferred to dwell underwater as they were built for swimming and hunting underwater. Their greatest military leaders were primarily experts in aquatic combat, and Riff Tamson was by no means an exception to this rule. Commander Tamson served a bit of a special role in the Separatist military hierarchy, acting both as an ambassador and a conqueror. He actually did a fair bit of negotiating on behalf of the Confederacy, advocating separatism to aquatic species all over the galaxy. Usually, he would act as an ambassador first and then as a commander if negotiations failed. Tamson's goal was to bring as many aquatic worlds as possible under the Confederacy's sway, partly out of loyalty to Count Dooku and partly to further his own agenda. As it turned out, Tamson was a warlord back home on Carcharis, and he had always wanted his people to be a major power in the galaxy. He saw his work for the Confederacy as a way of achieving this. As seen at the end of the Battle of Mon Cala, he would bring other Carcharodons to the planets he conquered, where they would take prominent positions in occupation governments. With this in mind, we speculate that Tamson planned for Carcharis to colonize the worlds he conquered. Tamson's speciality was working on aquatic planets, as warfare on water worlds was obviously much different than ground warfare anywhere else. Planning an underwater battle was tricky for most commanders, but for Tamson, it was almost second nature. This made him invaluable to the Confederacy and an obvious choice for deployment to water worlds like Mon Cala or Manaan. But Tamson was also an excellent commander in his own right, regardless of his innate advantages. He made use of a wide variety of assets and tactics, and if the Battle of Mon Cala is anything to go off, they were highly effective. Judging from his performance at Mon Cala, one of Tamson's greatest strengths as a commander was his reliance on a diversity of assets. As an agent of the Confederacy, he had access to a whole host of separatist war machines built for underwater combat, ranging from simple aqua battle droids to the deadly Trident-class assault ship. But Tamson didn't rely too heavily on any one of these assets, especially not early on in a given battle. He made extensive use of military assets from Carcharis, including Carcharodon deputies and Hydroid Medusas, rare but nigh unbeatable war machines that Tamson unleashed in swarms. His greatest strength, however, was how he manipulated local allies. During the Clone Wars, the Republic got plenty of mileage out of a tactic the Jedi called the militia model, which involved sending a small unit of clones to a planet to serve as the core of a much larger local militia. The idea was that the clones would train the locals to fight their own battles, meaning the militias they founded could defeat the Separatists more or less on their own. Tamson adopted a similar approach. On Mon Cala, Tamson made extensive use of Quarren Separatist factions to fight his battles for him, establishing an alliance with influential local chieftain Nosor Ree and the remnants of the Quarren Isolation League. But Tamson didn't just use local allies, he built his battle strategies around them. In the opening stages of the Battle of Mon Cala, Tamson made a show of following the Quarren's lead, and even though he was the one calling the shots from behind the scenes, he still made the opening stages of the battle a Quarren-centric affair. It was only in the later stages, when Tamson believed the battle was won, that Nosor Ree and the Quarren were sidelined. Tamson often acquired his local allies through political manipulation, with which he was apparently quite skilled. Political power can be more devastating than even the greatest of armies, and on Mon Cala, Tamson used the divisions and contradictions in local politics as a weapon. He stoked tensions between the Mon Calamari and the Quarren, driving the Quarren further into the Separatist camp, and then sparked a war by assassinating the planet's king. In one fell swoop, he left the Mon Calamari leadership weak and removed the last Mon Calamari political figure the Quarren trusted. Through political manipulation, Tamson drew the battle lines on Mon Cala, pushing different camps in various directions until his side was on top. Only then did he make a bid at conquest. Once all the pieces were in place, Tamson struck fast and hard. He was a big fan of overwhelming force, though he was shrewd enough to keep some of his greatest assets in reserve until battle was underway. He applied constant pressure on his enemies, bringing in new assets as the battle went on to keep them on their back foot. Tamson was an utterly ruthless commander. He didn't care much for the lives of those under his command, and he certainly didn't care for his enemies, whom he treated with the utmost savagery. Tamson tended to lead his armies from the front. This wasn't out of any sense of honor, but bloodlust. On the battlefield, he would attack anything in sight, often ripping enemies apart with his jaws or killing them with explosive knives. Though he was careful about initiating battles, once the fighting began, Tamson put even the Mandalorians to shame in terms of sheer aggression, not letting up until his enemies were soundly defeated. One of Tamson's most devastating tactics, which clearly displayed his ferocity, was the use of Hydroid Medusas. Hydroid Medusas were massive biomechanical war beasts from Carcharodon, jellyfish-like creatures with lightsaber-resistant armor and electrified tentacles. They were simple creatures, but they were incredibly dangerous. Tamson often deployed them in swarms, having the beasts rake their tentacles through enemy armies, flash-cooking troops with impunity. On Mon Cala, Tamson used Hydroid Medusas as a means of suppressing his enemies, preventing them from fighting en masse or out in the open. Once the Hydroid Medusas were out in force, all Tamson had to do was hunt down scattered pockets of resistance. Based on the Battle of Mon Cala, he seems to have employed fellow Carcharodons for this task, which made sense as his people were excellent hunters. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, his employment of the Carcharodons may have served as a double purpose, allowing Tamson to transition from an alliance with local groups to a more colonial relationship. That last part was Tamson's only real weakness. In the Battle of Mon Cala, Tamson took over the planet after the Mon Calamari were apparently defeated, ruling with his Carcharodon deputies and turning his allies into second-class citizens. On Mon Cala, this alienated the Quarren, leading them to ally with the Mon Calamari against the Separatists. It's possible that this might have occurred on other worlds as well. Local peoples rarely take kindly to arrogant outsiders claiming sovereignty over their homes, after all.
The first story arc of the Clone Wars' Season 7 has concluded, completing the tale of the Bad Batch and the Battle of Anaxis. As this video was produced in light of the new episode, it will obviously contain major spoilers, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, go watch it first. Seriously, you do not want the spoilers that are coming later, just watch it. The recent Bad Batch arc has featured a familiar character as its main antagonist, the spider-like Admiral Trench. Trench originally was a one-off character, created for and intended to die in the Season 2 episode Cat and Mouse. But the first episode of Season 6 revealed that he had in fact survived, albeit with heavy cyborg augmentations. The concluding episode of the Bad Batch arc, however, once more killed him off, and for real this time. With this hero of the Confederacy dead, we felt it would be fitting to take a closer look at Trench and how he came to be the Separatists' foremost admiral.
Turn back now. Retreat while you can, for I am your doom.
Trench's story begins on Secundus Ando, the homeworld of his species, the Harch. Secundus Ando, together with dozens of other colony worlds in the Lambda sector, was part of a wider mini-civilization which, at the time, was ruled from Ando proper by a government the Harch called the Spivarelda. Now, Andoan space didn't have the prettiest of histories, and Aqualish, the native inhabitants of Ando, were notoriously aggressive and bloodthirsty. As they dominated the region, it had a long track record of despotic governments, bloody revolutions, and civil wars. The Harch, who were planetary neighbors of the Aqualish, integrated themselves into the system quite well. At times, they themselves ruled Andoan space, or were the direct targets of revolutions, but most of the time, the harsh ruling nests preferred instead to sit behind the Andoan throne, so to speak, advising Aqualish rulers from the shadows. The Spivarelda was a typical Andoan government. It was totalitarian and repressive, and its leaders harbored a degree of distaste for the Republic. 102 years before the Battle of Yavin, a revolution against the Spivarelda began to brew in the form of the Andoan Free Colonies, 15 worlds on the fringes of Andoan space. These worlds, led by Andosha II and including Arbula, Horos, and Requish, were all newly settled and sought to break away from the Spivarelda, eventually prompting a crackdown from the region's rulers in 57 BBY. In retaliation, the Free Forces, a makeshift military group assembled by the Free Colonies, decided to go on the offensive by launching a surprise attack on Secundus Ando, as the Harsh World was among the Spivarelda's strongholds. The Battle of Secundus Ando was the first clash of the Andoan Wars, as the conflict was later named, and it was a foretaste of what the rest of the war would be like. Though the Free Forces had the element of surprise on their side, the Spivarelda had something that would prove to be more impactful, a fleet commander named Trench. Trench quickly recovered from the shock of the initial attack and led Secundus Ando's fleet against the raiders in retaliation. The battle was an Andoan victory, a victory that made Trench famous in the Lambda sector. The Andoan Wars were a long and bloody conflict lasting from 57 BBY to 39 BBY. Most of the war is shrouded in mystery, with the exception being how it ended. At the end of the conflict, the Spivarelda had the advantage, and they gave Trench the authority to take point in putting their momentum to good use, advancing along the Horos spine toward the Andosha system. Trench utterly routed the Free Forces at Arbula and Horos, and then went on to win a decisive victory at the Battle of Requish. The Battle of Requish left the Free Colonies at Trench's mercy, but the Spivarelda's victory there backfired. The Andoans had assumed Republic involvement in the conflict would be limited to endless debate in a Senate committee, but the sheer brutality of Trench's tactics at Requish and the firepower displayed there prompted the Republic judicial forces to finally intervene. The Andoan Wars were forced to an unexpected conclusion and the Republic disarmed the entire Lambda sector, which was enforced by a sizable judicial fleet. Republic involvement in the Andoan Wars radicalized the Andoans, and Trench quickly came to hate the Galactic government because of it. While on the other side of the galaxy, a similar intervention would prompt the same response from a Kaleesh warlord named Grievous in the years that followed. When the Confederacy of Independent Systems formed in 24 BBY, Ando was one of the first worlds in the galaxy to secede from the Republic, an action that was openly celebrated by the native Aqualish on the appropriately named Raquish thoroughfare. The outbreak of the Clone Wars saw the Andoan Wars restart, with the Spivarelda becoming hardline separatists and the Free Colonies becoming staunch loyalists. In the meantime, however, Trench had to find something else to do. He likely could have retired and lived out the rest of his life in luxury for his service to the Spivarelda, but knowing Trench, this likely held little appeal. Regardless, he ended up signing on with the Corporate Alliance, one of the major megacorporations that would go on to be represented by Pascal Argense on the Separatist Council. The Corporate Alliance put him to work as one of the leading commanders in their private fleet, and Trench quickly proved his worth against the Alliance's enemies. At worlds from Ord Namurt to Angira, Trench went to war with pirate groups that threatened Corporate Alliance operations. He shredded their fleets, bombed their bases to dust, and proved to be adept at dealing with some of the more unorthodox tactics, including the use of stealth ships. Pirates weren't his only targets either. In a bold raid at Prospera Jang, Trench attacked and captured the Korosti merchant fleet, which led Alliance leadership to consider him their foremost naval officer. In 34 BBY, Trench was selected to lead one of the Corporate Alliance's most daring operations yet, an attack on Malastare. The Alliance had hired Circadian pirates to attack Malastare's fuel tankers amidst a disagreement about fuel allocations. And then, a fleet led by Trench, composed of Circadian privateers and the Alliance's Fantail-class destroyers, blockaded the Malastare Narrows in an attempt to force Malastare to agree to their terms. But the Corporate Alliance's strong-arm tactics at Malastare backfired. Supreme Chancellor Valorum, fearing a shooting war wouldn't go well for the Dustic Sector's planetary security force, convinced 2 neighboring sectors to send military aid, and he also dispatched advisors to oversee the operation, including Jedi Knight Kepshi and a young officer named Wolffe. The results was the Battle of Malastare Narrows. Trench's tactical skill allowed the Corporate Alliance fleet to destroy many of the Republic's ships, but he simply couldn't hold off the full force of 3 PSF fleets. His flagship was vaporized during the battle, resulting in the surrender of the surviving Alliance forces. Trench was presumed dead. As we all know full well, Trench survived the loss of his flagship thanks to his tough hide and a particularly expensive set of pressure armor. He kept his survival a secret for the next 12 years, during which he was presumably still affiliated with the Corporate Alliance, and likely guided them in militarizing during the Separatist crisis. When the Clone Wars broke out, Trench returned to open war. He became an admiral in the CIS Navy, valued highly by Count Dooku due to his expertise, and likely won several battles for the Confederacy even before the Republic learned of his survival, probably in Andoan space, where conflict between the Spivarolda and Free Colonies had reignited. More notably, he was put in charge of the naval theatre of the Battle of Christosis, where now Admiral Yularen recognized his personal symbol on the side of his flagship, the Invincible, confirming at last that he had survived. That didn't last, of course. The opening stages of the Battle of Christosis saw the Bridge of the Invincible destroyed by Anakin Skywalker, and once more, Trench was presumed dead. With Admiral Trench dead, Anaxis was perfectly fine and... just kidding again, gotcha. He survived the Battle of Christosis too, though this time around he needed extensive cybernetic reconstruction before he returned to the front line. It's unknown when exactly Trench returned to active duty, but at the least, his return was common knowledge by the time of the Battle of Ringo Vinda and 20 BBY, a battle in which he once more led the Confederacy to victory after a lengthy stalemate. Later in the war, Trench, as one of the Confederacy's most capable admirals, was chosen to lead the assault on Anaxis, the renowned defender of the core. Between strategic data given to him by Echo and Skako Mana and his own tactical genius, Trench nearly succeeded in taking the Republic Bastion, a victory that easily could have won the Confederacy the war. But on the verge of Trench's ultimate victory, the Jedi and the Bad Batch managed to outsmart the wily Hajj, as we know from the most recent Clone Wars episode. The Republic's victory also came with Trench's death at the hands of Anakin Skywalker. With Admiral Trench dead, the Confederacy lost one of its greatest admirals, and we're not kidding this time, he's dead for real. Being impaled by Anakin Skywalker isn't something someone could survive, not even a tough old Hajj like Trench. His flagship was destroyed by Wrecker not long afterwards, and the Confederacy wouldn't launch another campaign in the Core Worlds until Grievous attacked Coruscant months later.